Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Doing What Matters podcast. I am your host, Teresa McCloy, and it is great to be back with you for another conversation about living from rest, not rush. And I have an amazing guest today with me on the podcast. We're going to be listening to an episode that I recorded with a brand new team member here at the REALIFE Process, and that is Nancy Bouwens. Nancy Bouwens joined our team back in December of 2023, and she is getting the ropes and getting acclimated to our team, and we are so excited to have her as actually our executive assistant on the team. But one of the things that Nancy recently talked about, because she's also one of our certified coaches, and on one of her social posts, I believe, she actually talked about her love of reading. And it really sparked in me how reading actually helps us to live from rest, not rush, how settling down into that learning mindset actually invites us into living from rest, not rush. So I'm going to have us listen in on this amazing interview that I did with Nancy, and you'll probably want to go grab the download offer that she has that's absolutely free. And we talk about that in the episode, but I'm going to give it here to you as well. It's at go.Nancy Bouwens, Bowens, Nancy Bouwens. Nancy is spelled with a Y, nancybowens.com/reading. So go.nancybowens.com/reading, and you can get a reading list of some of Nancy's 12, I think there's 12 favorite books that she has listed there from all genres of reading. But we also have a challenge for you. Nancy really inspired me. I've always been a reader, but Nancy really inspired me as to what do I want to be intentional about with my reading this year. So as you listen to this episode, you're going to get some practical tips of how Nancy fits in the number of books that she reads every year, the genres that she reads from, how she reads, what she does throughout the day, to fit reading into her everyday, ordinary life. And then at the end, you're going to hear a challenge that Nancy and I have for you that we want to follow up with a year from now. So enjoy this episode of really doing what matters and be intentional with your reading in 2024. So, Nancy Bouwens, I am so excited to have you on the Doing What Matters podcast. This is your first time to be a guest on the podcast, and I can't wait to dive into this conversation. So, welcome in, my friend.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. I've looked forward to this ever since we first talked about it.
Well, how this kind of came about is Nancy just recently actually joined our team here at the REALIFE Process. And her and I were just talking, and I always follow her blogs and some of her reading or some of the things that she writes. And she had written this particular blog or Facebook post, I'm not sure what it was, that I came across, and she was talking about kind of her approach to reading and learning. And I just thought, how much fun would it be for you and I to have a conversation? This definitely falls into the doing what matters, using this time that we have, many times that we can end up being in wasted time, for more purpose. So if you would, Nancy, share with me, how far back has it been since you've been a lover of reading, and take me back a little bit. How did reading start for you, and why does it matter? Why is it important?
I have loved to read ever since I can remember, probably going way back, third grade. I had a third grade teacher. She read to us every day. And my mother used to think, why isn't she teaching her, more math and science? And she didn't like this teacher because of that. I adored her. She opened up the world of reading to me. And so ever since then, I have loved to read. I could get lost in a book and never come up for air until I see the end.
Oh, that is so cool. What's just as a sidebar, what's your favorite genre? What is the favorite thing that you like to read?
Nonfiction is probably my favorite. I read that probably more than anything. However, when I'm on vacation and before bed, it's a novel. But
Okay.
if I'm reading normally, it's going to be nonfiction.
Oh, wow. So that leads me to kind of another question. And I know that for you that are listening, you're probably like Nancy and I. You probably have more than one book going at a time. So, Nancy, how many books usually are going at the same time?
I would say, well, only one novel at a time because that's all I can handle of that. But I probably have at least 4 or 5 nonfiction books that I'm reading, and start, stop, read a little bit, then this one I'm drawn to, or there's a new one I hear about. So yeah, usually probably at least 4 or 5 on my nightstand or on my coffee table, and or in my Kindle at any one time that I'm
Oh,
working.
good. Well, we're kindred spirits.
Yeah.
Before I get too far, though, I want you to know about something that Nancy has. So I'm going to talk about it again at the end of the episode. But Nancy has an amazing download for you all about reading. And I think, Nancy, it includes kind of your 12 books that you really love. And I'm honored that I get to be on the list with our book, Do What Matters. So thank you for that. But let's go ahead and mention where that download is located, if you would, and share that with us, because you're going to want to go grab it, especially after we kind of go through the rest of this conversation. So Nancy, where can they get that download of your favorite reading list?
Sure. Happy to share. It's really easy. It's go dot my name, Nancy Bouwens, BOUWENS.com, and then /reading.
Oh, super easy. And we'll have it in the show notes. So go.nancybowens.com/reading. And you can download, and I already downloaded it. It's a great list of books. In fact, I'm going to be adding some of them to my reading list. And what I love is Nancy goes in and she tells you about the book, but she kind of tells you a little bit about what she liked about the book, why it was an important book on her list. And it does have novels and it does have nonfiction. So both of the categories that you mentioned. So let's back up a little bit. We talked about you loving to read since third grade and some of the genres and how many books you're reading at a time. But what really caught my attention from the post that you had made talking about this was that you kind of have a goal of how many books you want to read. And it is a stretch goal for sure of how many books that you want to read in 2024. So share with our listeners, how many books are you wanting to dive into next year?
So my goal, and it is a stretch goal, is 52. So my goal is one a week, whether it's one every week or, kind of an overlap. But that is my hope. First, I set my goal of 26. I thought, no, that sounds too easy. Like I should be able to do that, no problem. But so I'm going to stretch. So we'll see how this goes.
So what is the plan? Like, what do you feel like, here, you've been through our real life process and taking a project and mapping it out and all of those things. So as you were thinking about your action steps in this reading goal that you have, what are some of the things that you think will help make that goal attainable? How have you broken it down?
Well, I go to the gym at least 3 times a week. So always I'm listening while I'm either walking or doing my exercises. So that's one. I work from home. And so I also have the opportunity to listen while I'm working. So
Okay.
there's that. So I do a lot of listening. Those are the 2 listening. But before bed at night, it's always reading. And one of the things that I usually like to do is in the morning, first thing, I'll do my quiet time, my devotions, whatever. And then I'll usually pick up whatever book I'm working on and read maybe 3 or 4 pages first thing in the morning.
Okay.
So that I know that I've done that already.
So let's recap. We got gym time. We got work time. Now, for everybody, that might not be possible. It may depend on what you're doing that's repetitive or whatever that you don't really have to concentrate. And then we've got before bed and we've got first thing in the morning. So almost 4 times a day in some way you're engaging with this project of reading these books. So do you rotate back and forth between certain kinds of books? Do you see a pattern to how you like to take in the books? Is there I do one that's more in the personal development and the one that's more in the faith space, or do you have any rhyme or reason to how you approach this project?
there's a lot of faith-based books that I read because my faith is so important to me. I weave it in and out, but I am really trying to kind of get out of the box a little bit and try to read not something that necessarily that I always agree with 100% because I want to learn and grow. It's like my way of looking at the world is not always the right way, or not always the way that everybody looks at the world, and I want to understand more. So really trying to not just read what always makes me comfortable.
I love that. And that leads me to something that I want to dive into a little bit more here in our conversation, because if you go to the download and get Nancy's download of her top 12, you're going to get an email from her. And this is one of the things, and I'm just going to read and quote Nancy here, that she says. She says, "Through books, we expand our horizon, experience adventure, learn new things, gain perspective, and deepen our connection with the world around us in ways that social media does not." So I'd like to talk about those things. As you just said, I want to challenge myself. That's one of the things I love about reading, is that when I read, I get someone else's perspective, someone else's way of leaning into how they would do something, how they would process a problem, even through novels, right? Like we get into the characters and the different things. But I'd love to know, as books that you read last year, when you think back about some of the books that you took in last year, what were the top maybe 2 or 3 books that you read last year? And if you were to name one of those that falls into this category of you learned something new or it expanded your horizon, does anything come to mind?
So there's 2 or 3 that of course, there's your book that was life-changing for me in so many ways because it reminded me to develop that rule of life, to look at life a little bit differently than what I normally do, and to kind of create that as an anchor for the days that I live. So there's that. That's definitely one of my top, within my top 3 or 4 of the year. But one of the ones that I read last year was Jennifer Allwood, and it was Fear is Not the Boss of You.
I love that book. I noticed that on your list.
She pushes you, but she does it in a way that kind of is a kick in the rear end and also a hug around the shoulder.
Yeah.
And then because I can get tangled up in fear, I can get afraid to do that next thing and to try new things, and I see myself as not able to, and so that was solid for me. There was a couple of novels, and I'm going to have to get back to you on the names of those because there were a couple of them. One of them was I think it was The Tattooist of Auschwitz, which, hello, that does not sound like a cheerful book. And it was a challenge book because it made me think about that time of our history as a world, and it was hard to read, but I couldn't put it down.
Yeah. And I do think that's the correct title, what you just said, because I've heard of that book. Going back, I happened to interview Jennifer Allwood right when that book came out several years ago. Her book, Fear is Not the Boss of You, came out in 2020 of all times. And I remember that her entire book tour got canceled. Like, she was scheduled to speak at all these events and do all these things. And actually, I was going to be at one of her events that she was hosting in Kansas City. And I was so excited to meet her and get to be a part and speak at her event. And all of that went away. And I remember interviewing her for the podcast just around that idea of how big an event that was in her life, and to have a book that she had written about fear is not the boss of you. And then we were living in some of the most fearful times there ever were, right when the book came out. So it is a great book. And I'll put the link to that podcast interview I did with her in our show notes for this episode, because that was 2 or 3 years ago, but it was a great interview, and she talks about that book. And I followed her for quite some time. And I love what you said too about reading books of history, times in history that are challenging times. I actually just went and saw the movie Boys in the Boat, which is, Dell and I went and saw that over the weekend. And that was probably one of my favorite books that I read last year. Very difficult book to read. It's a long book, but it's very, very I read it on Audible, like, you said you listened.
Mm-hmm.
So Dale and I would listen to it as we were driving to Florida and as we were driving back, on long stretches. And then we saw that the movie was coming out. And I'm like, we have to finish this book before we go see the movie. So right through Christmas, we pushed through, we got the book finished, and then we went and saw the movie. But that was it's such a good book. It's telling the story of the 1936 rowing team that goes to the Olympics in Germany. And I just love the character development of each of the people. So when you think about like even this idea of experiencing adventure, is that what you love about novels, is where it takes
Mm.
you? What's your love of novels?
I think it's like having an adventure in your head. And when I was trying to encourage my little granddaughter to read, she struggled with loving the reading process,
Hmm.
where I'm like, let's all read all day long. She struggled with that, and so I would say to her, honey, just think of it as like a movie in your head, like you can have an adventure in your mind anytime you want to. You can go anywhere you want to. And this summer, reading really came alive for her, and she really has it started to. And I said, "Didn't Nana tell you that that's how it would be?" And she's like,
Oh,
"Yeah, you know."
Oh, that's so cool. I
So
love it. It's like a movie in your head. And
yeah,
you can
yeah,
develop out the characters, right? And
right.
yeah. And that is the difference, I think, between a novel and a faith book or a personal development book, is just that adventure that
Hmm.
you can go on. What else comes to mind from books that you read last year? Is there any other book that stands out for you that our listeners might really go, "Oh, I've never even heard of that one or that author"?
Hmm. There were two that two similar in some ways. One is an older one. It's by Shauna Niequist, Bread and Wine.
Mm,
She is like my virtual mentor of hospitality and gathering people. I met her
yes.
one time in person, and it was such a special thing. It was I think it was one of her very first books. I saw her on a book tour, but I've read all of her books
Uh-huh.
thus far, and that one is like a love letter to gather around the table. And she does so much with food and connection and people and relationships. And I really, really have loved that one. Recipes are woven in there. And the other one is Accidental Homesteader by Kathy Lipp. And she also focuses a lot on gathering people around a table, building relationships, living a life of welcome. Her book is written in such a way they moved from Silicon Valley to 33 acres in Northern California, in the middle of literally nowhere, and total life change for them. But they've done it, and they didn't have all the answers, so it was a life of adventure. It was something new, something they didn't know what to expect, and they didn't know where it was going to go, and they made a lot of mistakes. But they're finding that the adventure of doing those things has changed their life. And
Mm,
creating home wherever you are. And I think that's something and Shauna talks a lot about that too. You create a home and you create a life of welcome.
yeah.
Those two things really inspired me. So those were two of my favorites from last year as well.
Oh, I love that. And I know for you, you've had some shifts, as your husband retired last year and different things.
Mm-hmm.
Many times, I don't know, I just love how God puts books or learning in our lives around even seasons of, as you just said, learning to like make home and love
Mm-hmm.
home wherever you are. And I think that's some of what you were walking in last year as you
Mm-hmm.
guys ventured out to Arizona and spent some time out there and just moved around a little bit more. So I love that those two books really spoke to you. And both of those books, if I recall right, are on your reading
They
book
are.
list. Yeah,
Yes,
that's
ma'am.
what I was thinking. So another author that you mentioned, and I know I hear a lot of people, and I've not read her too much, and I really want to, is Emily P. Freeman.
Oh, yes.
So tell me what you love about her books, because I know she's written several. I know our friend Lindsay that serves here at the REALIFE Process team. She loves Emily Freeman's
Mm-hmm.
books. So I know that one's on your list as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Emily P. Freeman, she writes in such a way that it is, again, invitation to slow down, focusing on what matters, noticing things. I mean, she dovetails so well with how I'm trying to live my
Hmm.
new season of life. And she just does it in a way that it's almost like you want to take a breath, pour a cup of tea, and just sit with it. She has another one, The Next Right Thing. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I hear that in my voice all the time. What is the next thing that I can do? What is the next right thing? I think that's one thing I find with books is that you'll get a snippet from here and a phrase from there, and you realize that these things are all building the inside of me. And I'm learning from, I have the opportunity by books, I have the opportunity to learn from all these wonderful, smart, wise, authentic, real people that are really just like me.
Yeah.
And they've just taken the time to write down the words and speak. And it's a way of, they have a way of encouraging people by the words that they write.
Mm,
And Emily does that so well, so well.
yeah. Love that. So when you're thinking of, you said something in the email that you sent out with the book list that I'd like to explore just a little bit, because you're just like me. Like you come up and you're sitting there in the evening or whatever, and the thing that we want to do is pick up our phone and start to scroll. Let's get a callus on our thumb or our finger or whatever, because
Mm-hmm.
we're scrolling and we're looking, and you even call it out. And I love that, of wasted time.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between, and this is a habit forming thing. And we talk about that a lot. If we really want to do what matters, I've talked about that so many times on the podcast. We have to create a new routine. We have to break a
Mm-hmm.
habit, create a new routine or new behavior until it comes a routine. And then many times it actually moves all the way over to a practice or a spiritual practice. So as you think back over this last year or so, as you've really kind of upped your reading game, and you get to that place where, it's evening time, is there any advice or any pointers you would have on how do I get off my phone and into a book? Anything
Mm-hmm.
that comes to mind?
Just in a practical way, I have a tendency, or I'm choosing to set my phone on the kitchen counter. I go sit on the couch, and there the phone is. It's not by me. I take off my watch so that my wrist isn't buzzing, because there's that distraction.
Yeah,
And I don't
there's
only have our
all the
phone, we have
things,
our
right?
wrist
Yeah.
talking to us. And then I take my blanket, curl up on the couch, get close to the light, and just start reading.
Mm,
Um, what's interesting is my husband will walk in and he'll say, "Oh, do you want your phone?" I'm like, "No, I don't.
yeah,
You want it." And so he's learning too that I'm trying to do things differently.
I
And
love
so,
that.
yeah, so just practically, physically separating myself from that, because I find that it's kind of my way of disconnecting if I've had a really busy or stressful day. I don't know why I think that reading the news and everyone else's problems makes me feel better, because that's really,
It
you're
does
just
not, right?
scrolling into
Right.
nothingness,
Yeah.
or
And
watching
that,
everybody's
I love the
another
difference
dance or something. But yeah.
the difference between I'm going to go on social media and do a comparison,
Uh-huh.
because that's what ends up happening, whether we like it or not. We're going, oh, I hope that we're all mature enough not to go there, but yet there's a tendency, right? It's our human
Mm-hmm.
nature to go, oh, look at this, look at that. Rather than choosing to go, I'm going to go learn something. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
go experience something. So I hope as you're listening, you caught the practical application of put the phone, the technology somewhere else, and get distance between it. Um, for me, one of the things I come up against, I'd love if you have any thoughts about this, because you mentioned I listen to books, I read on my Kindle or, a device, and, I'm reading a physical book. One of the problems I have is reading on my iPad. So I don't have a Kindle, I have, the bigger iPad. And I have to be really careful when I'm reading on that device that I turn off notifications so
Mm-hmm.
that I don't have the buzz in, of a message or a text or, social media or whatever it is that comes in. So depending on how you're wired, you may need to get a device that doesn't allow any of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you have? Do you have a Kindle?
That's what I did. I mean, I have an iPad and I love it, but I don't use it for reading.
Mm,
I choose to use my Kindle. For one thing, it's black and white, which is easier on my eyes. It has the little bit of a backlight, so I can read it in bed and turn the light off if I choose to.
Mm-hmm.
But it's if I read on the iPad, I will be distracted like nobody's business. So
Yeah, I'll be
that does
real
not work
honest.
for me.
That's what I'm finding as well. Is
Hmm.
it's a distraction for me to be on that kind of device. Now we're not promoting the purchase of Kindles, so we don't have an
No,
affiliate link or anything.
just
but
something other than yeah.
yeah, just being intentional, I think, is part of this process of becoming a reader or upping your game, which you're definitely going to try to do this year. Is there are more than one ways to read a book and
Hmm.
open your horizons and experience new adventures and learn new things, Audible, Kindles, iPads, if you can do it, the
Hmm.
actual physical book. One question I have for you is, if you listen to something, are you the person who also goes back and buys the book at some point? Or do you need a book to like take notes in or do anything in if you've listened to it?
I do both actually. A lot at first, I usually will look to see, I'll try to find it on Audible because I know if I'm driving or on a trip or whatever, I can do, or at the gym, I can listen to that and kind of get started. If I'm loving the book, then I will get the physical copy because I like to take notes. I like to highlight. I like to put
Mhm.
sticky notes in. So it just kind of depends on the type of book it is. Um, but yeah, I do often buy both of them. I try not to, clutter up my day with, or clutter up my bookshelf, I should say, with more books than what I need. So that's why the Kindle is great. But there are times, I mean, like my Jennifer Allwood book, notes, 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 notes all over the place,
Mhm.
highlights, sticky notes.
Yeah.
I mean, because I refer back to it, but I also have it on Audible.
Do you take notes outside of the book or in the book?
If I get it out of the library, I have a whole journal that I will write down notes as because you can't highlight a library book, that would not work. So
Yes.
I'm making my notes, and then if I have to return it before I am done with it, then I write down what page am I on, I return it, then I go back and request it again, and then
I
I start
love
my
it.
notes all over again. So
And that's something I wanted to talk about because I know many of my reader friends really access and use their local library. And,
mhm.
you know, I have never had that privilege. We've always lived so far out in the country. I mean, I could have paid a library membership, I suppose, but I've never used the library. So
Mm.
even as you think about reading, how do you use your local library for getting access to some of these books? Because I think that's kind of an underutilized resource that many people don't
Mhm.
think about.
The library is amazing. I would be broke as a joke if I didn't have the library because I need all of the books.
Yeah.
But I will often first I'll look to see if they have it. If it's a book I'm interested in, I look to see if they have it. I have even requested books to be ordered for the library. Like for instance for yours. Yours was not in my local library, so I made a request so they could get it in the library. So and you could because you can do that. I will also they can ship them from other libraries as well. So
Hmm.
it's a lot of fun because it is I could spend all day at the library if I had the opportunity. And again, I think that goes back to as a child, we lived in a very small town. And once a Saturday, my dad would take us to the local library and we could pick out 5 books. We had to be able to carry them home. If you can't carry them, you can't take them.
Yes.
So,
I remember that too. So when I grew up, I lived in a very small town as well. And my mom was an English teacher. And so one of her loves, and I don't think the library was over 2 rooms. It was very
mm,
small little library.
hmm
But she would go about once a week, sometimes twice a week. And, I obviously was tagging along and she would check out, she loves novels and she would check out books from the local library. That was how she spent a lot of her summer when she was off from teaching, was reading. And I always remember my mom reading. It's funny now because we talk about it and I was not a reader when I was small. I would get a book or two just because that's what you were supposed to do when you were, at the library, and they were probably super simple. Don't even remember if I read them. I don't think my love of reading really came to be until I really started working on personal development. And
hmm
then I read much more of those than I do of novels. And yet I'm going to challenge myself this year. And you've inspired me with your list, even to read into some novels. And that was all my mom read. So she laughs at me now. She goes, Teresa, I cannot believe she comes to my house and I just have shelves and shelves of books. And she's like, I cannot believe that you turned out to be a reader. One thing that was helpful for me probably about 15 years ago, I actually took a course on reading and just some online course that was about reading. And one of the things I loved was, I don't even remember who did the course, but it was permission that I did not have to finish the book. Mm-hmm. And that was huge for me with either a novel that I'm like, okay, I'm halfway through this, but I'm not really into the story. You know, I really can't relate or whatever. And there was something about, or I'm doing a personal development book and, you know, I've gotten partway through it. There was something free for me of going, I don't have to finish this. This is okay. And his thought to me that he gave was give the book away or donate it to your local library if you've purchased it. Because, you know, the guilt factor comes in of, gosh, I just spent $15 or $20, maybe even $30 on this book, and I'm not finishing it. And so it's hanging over your head. I just wonder, have you ever experienced that? Do you have this, I've got to finish the book, I've got to go, because I know you have a goal, 52 books. So have you ever experienced that?
Well, actually, just last night I was reading my novel, and then another one became available at my library. I'm like, oh, I really want to read that one, but I need to finish this one. And I picked up the one I needed to finish. I thought, I'm not liking this book. I'm done with it. Return. It's done. I just decided not to. I had another book that I just recently read, and it's by an author that I normally love. And I've read a lot of his books, and I was sure this was going to be great. And I just kept pushing through, and I wasn't loving it. I did push through and finish it because I respect him enough to know there's going to be gold in here. And I wanted to find it. I was listening to it at the gym, but if I was trying to read it, I would have never made it through. So that made a difference for me. Some books I can't sit down and read, but I will listen to. So that one, and I did find gold. And so I'm glad I finished it, but it wouldn't be one I would put on my list, you know?
Yes. Yeah. I love that. You know, so there's times I think, you know, you just listen to the God's still small voice to say there's something in here for you in this book because you trusted the author. And I think that's important too. We get our favorite authors. We get people that, you know, whenever they put out a book, we're reading that book because it's in a genre that we like or something that we like. So I think that makes a difference too. We really do develop kind of relationships with authors that we know, like, and trust. And so, you know, you're going to push through. But it was helpful for me to just have the permission that it was okay if it's a new author for me and I've, you know, feel like I've gotten what I needed from that particular book or whatever to let it go. And I love the idea of give it to someone else. Maybe it's exactly, you know, what they need or what they have. So as we're kind of wrapping up, there's one more question I wanted to ask you about books and reading before we talk a little bit more about your plan. Do you have books that you're like, this is a book I would always give away to a friend? Like that you're like, this is one that if I was to give a gift, this is the book I would give. Or I keep one of these on hand because I always want to give away this book. Do you have any of that in your love of reading?
I usually have one a year. So usually each Christmas I'll have a book that has been impactful for me that I'll give away that Christmas.
Or, that's cool.
In fact, one time my friend's like, you gave this one to me already for my birthday. I'm like, oh, great. Well, give it back.
You really needed it.
Yeah. That's how much I loved the book. I wanted to have it twice. But I have done that probably the last 3 or 4 years. I've chosen a book as my theme, and I'll buy maybe 8 or 10 of them. And then that'll be part of what I give my friends for Christmas.
I love that. And there's no greater gift, I think, than getting a book from someone because you know it's something they cared about and they loved. And, you know, they want you or you want them to experience the same thing you did. Well, let's bring this full circle back around to your goal of 52 books this year. Do you care to share with us? I know you have a list that we're going to download. And don't forget to go download Nancy's list. She talked about some of them, but not all of them that she loved. But as you think about next year, are there any books that come to mind that you're anticipating reading in the coming year?
Mm-hmm. One of them is actually on the list because I started it and haven't finished it. So it's going to be my one. Actually, I started it already. It's John Acuff's Soundtracks. So that's one that I'm going to plan to read first part of the year. That's probably a January read. Also planning to read Shauna's newest book, which I think is maybe a year or two old by now. I can't believe I haven't read it yet, but I guess I haven't learned that yet because I
Yeah.
feel like that's just another great one. I love everything she writes. So, and then I have another one that it's called Praying the Scriptures for Your Children.
Ooh.
And it is not a book you're just going to sit and read. It's going to be more one that's going to sit on my nightstand and I'm going to pick it up. And, sometimes there's times you can just pray and pour your heart out to God, and sometimes there are no words. And I picked up this book and I'm just working through it and places to put the names of your children and your grandchildren.
Wow.
It's very precious. So
That sounds amazing. So I'm going to jump in with Nancy, and she didn't know I was going to do this, but this is the commitment we're making to you as our listeners, is I am also going to commit to, and I am not as bold as Nancy, I'm going to go with half. I'm going to go with 26 books this year. And we're going to come back a year from now and do another podcast. And we're going to share with you where we got in our goals, what happened from reading. We're going to be pretty intentional together to hold each other accountable. As I said, Nancy's joined our team recently here at the REALIFE Process, so we talk almost daily. And so I think we're going to have some real fun just talking about books that we're reading and what we're doing. And then we're going to come back a year from now and kind of review what was the experience like. Me at 26, Nancy at 52. We're putting it out there. She's stretching herself. I don't think I've ever read 26 books in a year, so that will be a stretch for me. But I love that we're going to give each other permission to do Audible, Kindle, real books, whatever it is. Nancy gave us some great practical ways that we can work that in throughout our day. And, car time, all those types of things. And, maybe you're listening and you're like, I want to join you in the challenge. We would love to hear from you. We would love to know if you're, you can either email Nancy when you download, you'll get her email. She'll send it to you. You can respond back to Nancy. You can respond back to me, Teresa at the REALIFE Process, and let us know if you want to be in on the journey of just expanding. As Nancy said, I loved it. Expanding our horizons, our experiences of adventure, learning new things, and gaining perspective. Let's get off the social media and into a really good book. So, Nancy, thanks for challenging me and challenging those who are listening in today as well. I appreciate you being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It has been sheer delight. Thank you so
Well,
much. I'm
great.
excited to see where this journey goes. And welcome to our challenge. Yes.
Yeah, welcome to our challenge. She's like, I didn't know we were doing this. I'm like, yes, we are.
I like it.
I like it. So tell us one more time where we can download your list, because you don't have to do the same number as Nancy and I. Maybe for you, it's 12. Nancy has an amazing list of 12 books from all different spaces: the faith space, the novel space, the personal development. And you could just read those 12. And maybe that's your challenge, is just those books. But give us that link one more time, Nancy, before we wrap it up here today on the podcast.
Absolutely. So it's Nancy Bouwens, B-O-U, be like baby, OUWENS.com//reading.
Awesome. So there's a ready-made list for you, ready to go. She even has in that download like a place for you to write down the books that you would like to read and kind of keep track of those. And we'll be doing the same. And we're going to come back a year from now and just share with you the 1st of January, 2025, kind of what the experience was like, what were our takeaways, what did God open up for us through the pages and the listening of a book. So again, Nancy, thanks for being with us. Can't wait to do this journey with you together. And just thanks so much, friend.
Thank you.
Well, what a great episode that was with Nancy. I hope you caught the challenge that we have for you in this year to be intentional with your reading. How many books are you willing to set aside time for learning and doing what matters through books, audiobooks, books on your Kindle or your reading device, books that you read in person? It doesn't matter, but we want to come back a year from now, and Nancy and I want to check in with you and see how you're doing along the way. Remember, I value community so much, and I want to do this journey of reading books and learning right along with you. So I have the challenge out there to do the number of books that I'm going to do. I hope you'll set a challenge for the number of books that you're going to do. And let's get started in 2024, really leaning into these extraordinary moments that we can have through the pages of a book. So as we end each and every week, remember that every ordinary day does have an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. And we'll be back next week with more from the Doing What Matters podcast. Have a great week, everyone.